Okay, welcome to this room. And as it was mentioned before, in parallel with campus opening, we also have an international summer school going on. Initially, we were supposed to start with a keynote by Professor Bengt Holmström. However, since he couldn't travel from Boston to Finland as initially planned, then we have moved Bengt's lecture to 4 o'clock. You're all welcome. And before Bengt's lecture, we also have a lecture and discussion on the game industry ecosystem here in Finland. The lecture is given by Professor Antti Ainamo, but we will also have a great discussion because Peter also agreed to be part of it, and as an expert in this area, he can certainly also contribute a lot of ideas to this discussion. But now let's move to the first group of short presentations and the panel discussion. And I am only going to introduce the moderator, and the moderator will introduce the speakers. So I would like to introduce Dr. Anna Ebers-Brugel. Anna is director of our international summer school. She's also a visiting faculty at EBS. She's also visiting faculty at Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C., University of Maryland College Park. She's actually based in Washington, D.C., where she has lived for a while. She has worked for the University of Texas, also for the U.S. Department of Energy. She earned her doctorate and also as a Fulbright scholar in the U.S. and did her postdoctoral research at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland for several years. And she's also a graduate of Tartu University. Congrats, Kadri. Kadri is a head of the economics and management department at Tartu University. So Anna, floor is yours, and you will take over, please. Oh, you don't need the mic, okay.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay, this works. Melis, thank you for the kind introduction. I'm really pleased that you did not forget to mention I'm originally from Estonia, and it's always a pleasure to be back. And I did an exchange year in Helsinki and called Helsinki my home for a year. Today, it's an utmost pleasure to welcome 3 thinkers, global thinkers that we have here on campus. And I will introduce them in the order that they appeared on the program. So first is Dr. Risto Pentilla. He's a CEO of Nordic West Office, and he specializes in scenario methods and has been creating scenarios for Finland since 1990s. Currently, he advises leading Nordic companies on scenario work. Risto is a former member of the Finnish Parliament and has worked for World Economic Forum and Oxford Analytica. He has a doctorate from Oxford University. He's also a frequent visitor to Estonia, where I had the pleasure of meeting Risto last year, and he's a long-term friend of EBS. Professor Timo Seppälä is a professor of practice of digital operations at the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management at Aalto University and a chief research scientist at the Research Institute for the Finnish Economy. He holds a PhD in industrial economics and currently researches a number of exciting topics, but the ones I chose to highlight are digital platforms for business, industrial platform governance, and blockchain technology. And last but not least, Peter Vesterbacka. He is an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur. Today he will talk to us about Finest Bay Area. And because I'm from the US, I can say I'm from the US by now, I can't help but reading it as Finest Bay Area. Oh, got it. So among other things, he has co-created HP Bazaar, Mobile Mondays, Slush, and Startup Sauna. He was the mighty eagle of the Angry Birds. By the show of hands, everybody knows Angry Birds. I did play that, I can tell you that. He was the mighty eagle for many years, and he has been named one of the top 100 most influential people on the planet by Time magazine in 2011. Wonderful panel, such a pleasure to moderate. Welcome everybody. Welcome especially to our summer school students, and we're going to have an awesome discussion right now. So I'm not sure about the seating. Are we supposed to sit down, or in which way because speakers have prepared the presentations. Mm-hmm.
So which order do you want? Goes first. Is that Risto then?
Actually, I think you were supposed to.
I was supposed to.
Yeah, Risto.
Okay.
Very good, so we got it right.
Will there be a presentation of Timo, of Risto on the...
Yeah. Okay.
Nordic West Office, Dr. Risto Pentilla. I think the floor is yours now.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. Pleasure to be here. And what I'm going to do is start with the global context in which Finland is operating, and then look at green and digital futures for Finland, as I was asked to do. My main message is that futures is the right way to describe our future. There are very different options for both the green transition and our digital future. And what I'll do is just very briefly sketch some of them. This is based on work that we did with 6 leading Finnish energy companies and technology companies. And it gives you just an idea of how to perhaps formulate some of the things that may be happening in the future. But let's start with this, Finland in a global context. Everyone's so happy about how great the Finnish economy is doing. And I want to provoke a bit of a discussion. How well are we actually doing? We are there with sub-Saharan Africa with 3% growth this year. Now, of course, we know that if you look at these numbers, it depends on how big a fall you had as a result of COVID. India went 10% down, so they're coming 9% up. Finland had a smaller bump, so that's part of the story. But basically, my message here is that we have an uphill battle. Our companies are doing really well, but if you look at the macro picture, it doesn't look terribly good. The Bank of Finland expects Finland to be growing about 1.5% over the next 10 years. So that's not great news. So what we need to do is escalate both the green and the digital sort of dimension of our economy. So we have a lot of green, we have a lot of digital things going on. So we should really be able to do really well in the future. However, my argument really is that it depends on which sort of world we are going to be living in. We can have a fast green transition that is very driven by disruptive technological development, or we can have a slow digital, slow green transition without any real technological advances. And these sort of very variables determine as to where Finland is going to be situated. This, of course, applies to Sweden and Estonia, all of the Nordics, new Nordics as I call them. So basically, this is what we came up with our scenario work, and this is really jumping from sort of one big idea to the next. But we can be stuck in a situation where the green transition is fast, but it's very regulation driven. And that brings a lot of challenges. And you may think that we are already there if you look at what's happening in the European Union or in the US, very sort of regulation driven. Or we actually might end up in a place where regulation and business and technology are aligned. So that's what we call the green tech version. High alert is where global warming is out of hand because we can't cooperate, there's no technological innovations, and then we can go back to money talks, which is sort of the most interesting scenario, because really depending on what consumers really want, it may be green as well. If we believe that the transition already has happened, that investors and consumers want a green future, then that can be green as well. But if you look at China, for example, then it's likely to be both renewables and fossils. So my main message here is that 4 different futures and 4 different climate futures as well. In some of them, we will be able to keep the sort of climate warming to under 2, even 1.5%. But really, that's the storyline. And here are some examples. Now, if we were to end up in a very sort of regulation-driven world, we already see indications of that within the European Union. Carbon border tax is already being planned, and it's going to be step by step introduced. So that's the sort of world where Finland would probably do really well, but then it depends on how our industries are regulated. Forestry, if Brussels decides that forestry is bad for the environment, then that's goodbye to our forestry industry. I'm exaggerating. But this is really the point, that when you go to this regulation first, it's really not up to us, it's really up to somebody else to determine whether we are going to do well. Green tech, hydrogen is an example of what might happen. Fortum in Finland is very well positioned to take advantage of that. And then money talks, as I mentioned, it's going to be both renewables, Neste, airplane fuels, and fossils still playing a major role in the future. And then high alert is the one where we will be just sort of building defenses against rising tides of water. Let's hope we do not get stuck in that corner of the scenario matrix. So that's really all. So what I wanted to say is that yes, Finland is very well positioned. If you look at our growth figures, they are not that great at the moment, but we have in these 2 areas, green technologies and digitalization. I think that Finland, Estonia together can learn from each other and make a great contribution to our own well-being, but also the well-being of our globe. That's all, Anna.
Thank you, Risto. Since we have our audience in here, let's do a little bit of social science research.
Okay.
Let's ask our audience 2 questions. 1, by the show of hands, which scenario do you think is the most likely that will emerge? Just by the show of hands. Regulation first.
Can we have those scenarios?
The
back
scenarios
up?
would be
Yeah,
useful
okay.
to have them up there.
I think this would actually go for at least all of Europe, maybe globe as well. Yeah, let's
European?
Europe?
Yeah, let's do Europe.
Yeah.
So regulation first. Carbon border tax. Here we go.
About 10, 12.
High alert. Here's our pessimist. Professor Mill is kissing. I have to call him out on that. Green tech. Here are our technology optimists. And money talks. Here we go. It does talk indeed. Well, you can put this highly scientific method into their next publication.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I counted. It was 37% for the first and 37% for the last, and then the rest were 62% combined. So, but that was interesting. Actually, the first and the last got the most votes. Clearly, regulation or money talks.
Right, you're correct. So wonderful. Let's give Risto a hand.
Thank you.
Timo is going to introduce us to the world of energy consumption in the ICT sector. Timo, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So, good morning also from my behalf. So, a couple of points related to digitalization in general. So, basically, the key motivation for our study for this study in specific came from the fact that we noted 2 years ago that there is no studies available about the energy consumption of an ICT. And we have not been focusing on energy consumption of an ICT for the last, or the energy efficiency of an ICT for the last 30 years. So we have been just implementing ICT to the different function of the company for the last 30 years without knowing that how much actually digitalization is consuming energy. And for me as a professor from the management perspective, so basically we came with the fact that without numbers, if you don't have numbers, if people are just talking energy consumption without any measurable things, numbers, we cannot sort of talk about the change. We cannot manage the change if numbers are simply not there. So some time ago, 2 years ago, Sitra over here in Finland asked us to make the calculations for the ICT industry, and we made those. And in fact, that in this report that what we published roughly, the English version of that was published in January this year. We took basically a bit of a different approach to ICT. So basically, you need to really understand what the ICT is. It is not just about the ICT companies. It is quite a few companies. And for this study that what we did, we basically took the definition of an ICT sector from the OECD. And we started sort of using different numbers from the Statistics Finland to be able to make sort of calculations related to this. So we know the facts behind basically the higher energy consumption of the ICT. We know that the data use is basically growing all the time. We know the IP traffic is growing all the time. And then basically during the last 2 years, during the COVID, well, the numbers have been increasing all the time. Quite a few, at least that in the media, I'm always blaming the media because I hate the media. And the fact is that they always take a side. They don't tell all the different stories. At least over here in Finland, what happened during these last 2 years, they are not telling you all the stories. But basically, we know quite a lot that consumers have been complained about this. That okay, we are watching cat videos on internet, and that is causing the thing. That is not the fact. Those are not really the facts. Those are really sort of the stories that come out from somewhere that I don't know. But those are really not sort of behind sort of the energy consumption of an ICT industry. It is something else. It is basically new technologies that are behind those numbers. Blockchain technology, artificial intelligence technologies, those are the ones that cause these raises in energy consumption. Not that what we are watching or consuming. It is the ICT companies that are implementing these technologies into their solutions, and that's the way forward. So basically, my point over here is that the companies using these technologies, as I said, have not been focusing on the energy efficiency of these systems during the last 30 years. That's quite amazing. So basically, what we then came up, we sort of we calculated the numbers for Finland, and then basically. Since, well, we all know that statistics are typically quite late, so we were able to calculate the numbers for 2018. So 1.1% of the total energy consumption of a Finnish ICT is basically the energy consumption of the Finnish ICT industry. Electricity is basically the main But, well, we have been talking a lot about the electricity, but in ICT, we are using quite a lot of the fossil fuels. We are using heat. So we need to remember that that's sort of the other part of the story, that it is not just electricity, it is also something else. And like I said, that we have been basically blaming about the people that they use a lot of energy when they are watching the cat videos. The fact is that it is only 1.8% of our households' energy use in total. So it's really nothing. Unfortunately, there are no studies over here in Finland for that. So that figure is basically from the US. And it has not been increasing that much. There was a bump in 2015, and that is basically only caused by the fact that we are collecting or calculating the statistics in a different way between those time periods. But the total electricity consumption has been increased by 1.8% during the last sort of years. And well, of course, this kind of analysis could be made to extend it to cover the other industries as well. So what we are now doing during this year? So we are, as I said, that it's very difficult to manage something without any numbers. So we are also calculating what are the greenhouse gas emissions for the ICT sector. We are basically going to be providing facts related to the carbon leakage because of a lot of consumption that, for example, when we are watching the videos over here in Finland, and because we do not have the data centers over here, the data centers are somewhere else, there is a carbon leakage, and we need to understand that how much that carbon leakage is when it comes to using ICT over here. We made a preliminary analysis on that, and that was roughly 48%. So that was the preliminary number that we gave in this earlier report, but we are now sort of recalculating that as one. So from the economy perspective is that as I said, that a lot of the ICT consumption for the energy is over here in Finland, but a lot of that is also outside of our borders, and in fact that one of the policy recommendations that we gave for the EU Commission based on our report that we need to have these numbers for all the European countries in the future, so that we are really capable of discussing the weaknesses and the benefits of an ICT when it comes to implementing the technology. So thank you very much from my behalf.
I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions. I'm especially interested whether I should sell my Dogecoin because it's harming the environment. However, we will hold our questions until we hear from Peter. Peter or Peter will tell us more about the finest Bay Area and the most important resource that we have, which is our people. He will also show us a fun video.
Yeah, so we already touched on kind of like this was like the finest Bay Area, but always say that it's not something that we made up because it really is, taking Finn out of Finland and Est out of Estonia, so then you end up with the finest Bay Area. So it's very much like facts based, and I think that's important, and it actually links to kind of like the big picture and what we're working on, kind of like over here. Also mentioned that was involved in starting Slush here in Finland. That's now the biggest and best startup event on the planet. And it's the biggest gathering of Estonian startups anywhere on the planet. It's the biggest gathering of Swedish startups anywhere on the planet. It's the biggest gathering of startups, like, period. But if you look at like the history of Slush, I think it's very important because that's also all about the people. And kind of like the background to why we started Slush is actually that in 2007, I was actually at an event like this at Aalto, or it was back then it was the University of Technology. But anyway, gave a talk about entrepreneurship. And then I had about 600 students in the audience, and then I asked the students that, you know, like, how many of you guys are going to start a company or join a startup once you graduate, or even before, which is, you know, like even better. And in 2007, out of 600 students, 3 raised their hand. You know, and that was like pathetic. I mean, you know, really? I mean, all of you want to go and work for Nokia and Kone and Wärtsilä and, you know, the government. You know, and of course, there's nothing wrong with that. We need people that maintain kind of like the status quo. I mean, that's also important. But if everybody's just, you know, like, okay, maintaining the status quo, we wouldn't be here. And it's very, very important that we have entrepreneurs, and it doesn't mean that everybody has to go and work for a startup, but we need this entrepreneurial mindset and attitude everywhere, also in government. And I think that the Estonian government has been a very good example of that. You know, for good reason, Estonia should be proud of, you know, the e-government and like the e-residency was mentioned, a lot of these things. And there's a lot that we could do much, much better over here, you know, on the Finnish side. But yeah, anyway, so if you then look at, you know, that situation, that only 3 people out of 600 wanted to kind of like go out there and make stuff happen. That's like a disaster. So we had to do something about that. And, you know, Finland, Estonia, we're both like small nations. So when we have a big problem, how do we solve it? We solve it by working together. So then together with a few friends, we started Slush in 2008. And first Slush, we had about 300 people show up, and then invited some, you know, like fellow entrepreneurs, founders. So we had Risto Siilasmaa, founder of F-Secure, later became chairman of Nokia. We had Ilkka Paananen, he was running Digital Chocolate at the time, and of course now everybody knows Ilkka because a few years later he launched Supercell at Slush. And we had Monty Videnius, who started MySQL, one of the very first unicorns coming out of this area when they sold to Oracle back in the day or actually to Sun, and then okay, ended up at Oracle for like $1 billion. And then we had Sampo Karjalainen, who started something called Sulake Habbo Hotel. He's now at Facebook. And then we had Ilja Laus from Vilnius, Lithuania. He started a company called GetJar, basically the first company like in Baltics that got investment from Accel, so one of the like leading VC companies in the valley. But anyway, so they were there sharing their ideas and thoughts and their entrepreneurial journeys. Also invited Matt Marshall, who started VentureBeat, so you know, one of these blogs covering startups from the valley, because we wanted to get the message out that hey, there's like stuff happening over here in Finland. And then you might ask, you know, like, okay, so why did we decide to call it Slush? And there's actually a very good reason, and that's also kind of like why we won and why Slush became the biggest and best startup event on the planet. I'm sure that most of you have been to startup events, you know, like around the planet, and you always hear that, Peter, Beijing will be the Silicon Valley of China. Then the following day you go to Hangzhou, and then Jack Ma sings a song, and then, you know, the mayor of Hangzhou gets on stage and says that Hangzhou will be the Silicon Valley of China. And when I was in Tartu, you know, like first time ever, like a couple of years ago, I was told that Tartu will be like this, is this like smart city? And I said, stop right there. I have heard this so many times. Even Tampere wants to be like the Silicon Valley of smart traffic or something like that. Everybody is like Silicon Valley this, Silicon Valley that. And actually a bit about my career, I actually started working at the original like tech startup, the one that Bill and Dave started in their garage in Palo Alto in California in 1939. And then I always have to say, because we have young people here as well, that 1939, before my time, I wasn't there. But, you know, I had a chance to meet with Bill and Dave when they were still around. So fantastic, fantastic entrepreneurs. Not only did they start Hewlett-Packard in that famous garage, but they started the whole Silicon Valley. That's where it got started. So I know a little bit about Silicon Valley and know my way around there. So it's a fantastic place, great source for inspiration, but it's already there. We can't lead by following. We can't copy our way into leadership. Doesn't work that way. So when we started Slush, intentionally, we started it in November. So we invited people to come to Helsinki in November. And if you come to Helsinki or Tallinn in November, we all know that it's cold. It's dark. And if you're lucky, there's slush on the ground. So it's very clear that it's not the Silicon Valley. It's much, much better because it's different. that's the thing. That's how you win. I mean, that's what we did with Angry Birds, Slush, Startup Sauna, all of these things, that we are doing things differently. And that is also then comes back to this finest Bay Area. What we did with Slush, actually, because of Slush and many other things, Finland was actually, and many years now, has been the biggest recipient of venture capital per capita anywhere in Europe. Okay, Europe, very low bar, but I mean, it's not something. So it's a good start. And then we start looking at what's going on in Estonia. Estonia has the highest number of unicorns per capita. 7 by last count, so it started with Playtech, they're in Tartu, and now because of that, Tartu has a fantastic startup ecosystem. What I really like about Tartu, you walk around, you bump into the university, then there's startup, university, startup, it's fantastic. And Tartu is also a great, let's say, inspiration always, because you have about 20% of the whole entire population students. So that's something that's also very important for all these hotspots, like Silicon Valley. You have Stanford, Berkeley, that's where all the innovation comes from. So the whole ecosystem you need to put together. But yeah, so then if you look at what we're doing with this finest Bay Area, it's like a continuation of what we started with Slush and all of that. And again, on the unicorn front, like with Playtech and Tartu, then you had Skype, you had TransferWise, or just Wise nowadays, Bolt, Pipedrive, and so on and so on. So it's good start. And I think that if you look at what Estonia has achieved, I mean, Wise was just listed 10 billion valuation, the first decacorn out of Estonia. So, welcome to the club. We had Supercell was the first decacorn in Europe. And then if you start looking at that in a bit more detail, I was in Beijing before the pandemic. Professor from Tsinghua was giving a talk. He was very, very proud of the fact that China has over 200 unicorns. So they're competing very efficiently with Silicon Valley. And okay, I mean, that's like very nice. A chance to talk after him, and said, okay, if you do the math, so let's look at my friends in Estonia. At that time, it was, like 5 unicorns, which is also like a lot. But if you do the math, China, 1.4 billion population, 200 unicorns, means that you need 7 million people to create just one unicorn in China. While in Estonia, roughly 200,000 people. So look at the efficiency. And this is, like all about the people. And this is why we can already, really call ourselves the finest Bay Area. Because we're far, far ahead of Silicon Valley or China or, you name it. Take games here in Finland. We have the highest density of games companies, games talent anywhere in the world. You can't compete with us if you're in Tokyo or in London or, you name it. By far the highest density. And because of that, there's success story after success story after success story. So what we are doing now, we're building a tunnel to connect Helsinki and Tallinn. We're going to reduce the travel time to 20 minutes. Of course, that's going to create like amazing acceleration for the whole Helsinki-Tallinn metropolitan area with about 2 million people right now, but soon to be 3 million. So that brings me to the other important thing. We have entrepreneurship, but we need education. That's the foundation for all of that. And that's why I'm super, super happy to be here today, because EBS is the only entity that has a campus in Helsinki and Tallinn. And I think that makes you, like the finest. So that's like a very good start as well. But I think that we need more of that. And I think that we have a fantastic opportunity to do even more collaboration between, Helsinki and Tallinn, Finland and Estonia. And we're already, showing the world and the EU the way forward. So we need to do more of that. And, Risto was describing the scenario. So yes, we should work on making that upper right-hand corner, like make that happen. That's also where we happen to be in EU in like geographically speaking. So seems like we're in the right space, if you look at these kind of like grids. But yeah, so what we're doing now is building this finest Bay Area, working very hard on talent attraction. So we want to have 150,000 international university students here in Finland, 40,000 for Estonia. Sure, we can add 10,000 in Tartu easily, and then EBS, we need to work together and make that even bigger number. And then one thing that I wanted to finish with, and actually what we started doing now quite recently here, and I think it's an interesting example of how we can change some of these scenarios like going forward, because we all know aging population in Finland, aging population in Estonia, we're not like growing. So everybody takes that for granted that, you know, like that's the way it's going to go, and, you know, like, yeah, it's going to be not so fun going forward. So what we started doing when we worked on this, attracting more university students here, I mean, we're still far from our goal of 150,000. The 150,000, by the way, makes us as good as Canada, New Zealand, Australia. So that's like the benchmark. If you take the number of international students and then compare it to the total population, New Zealand 2.25% international students, Canada over 2, Australia over 2, Finland 0.37. So clearly we're not doing our job. So we need to be much more international. One thing we realized when we started doing this is that we're completely missing the international students at the high school level. And then, you know, I've been told that, you know, it's very difficult to learn like the Finnish language and like all of that. So we started a small pilot in Vietnam and Uzbekistan. And we had some technical challenges, so I couldn't share the video, but I'm gonna show you. You have it? Oh, okay, let's show it then. Yeah, cool. Because this is a video of some of our Vietnamese friends after having studied Finnish for half a year. And they have now started actually high school here in Finland last week.
Moi kaikki! Me ollaan tässä Helsingissä Suomenlinnassa.
So Bambi moved here from Vietnam 5 years ago.
Tosi hauskoja, mutta meillä on tosi ikävä teitä. Ja meidän opiskelijoilla on jotain viestiä teille. Okei, katsotaan.
So this is after 6 months studying Finland online.
Mä oon Thi ja haluan sanoa, että kiitos paljon viimeistä 2 viikosta. Meillä on ollut tosi hauska ja iloinen.
Mä oon Rachel ja me opiskelemme niin paljon kaikilta syömiltä.
So Rachel is now going to high school in Pori.
Ja se on meille tosi tärkeää, erittäin tärkeää tulevaisuudessa.
Joo, Jerry on tässä. Ensimmäisesti on opettajat Maria, Elina, Etu, Isla, Krista ja Antero. Kiitos kaikille auttamisestanne. Te autitte meistä paljon koko ajan ja ette ollut vain opettajia, mutta olitte myös kaverimme. Me olemme oppineet monta uutta asiaa ja sanaa suomen kielessä teidän takia. Ja sitten on meidän Janho, Milan ja Unna. Te olitte todella kiltejä, hauskoja.
So this is a thank you video to Salla, where they spent 2 weeks in summer school before they started high school last week.
Ja kesäleirin aikana me olimme tavanneet myös muuta venäläistä ja suomalaista ystävää.
Some Russian students, Vietnamese students, Finnish students there for 2 weeks in Salla. But yeah, we can stop the video so you get the point. But this is based on this Salla model. They have been doing this high school program for 15 years. Every year, 10 Russian students have started high school in Finnish language there. And they learn Finnish in, you know, like Petroskoye and St. Petersburg and Murmansk, like close to the border. And then they come to Salla, they do high school for 3 years, and the results have been like amazing. They're performing better than average, but the most important thing for us, and, you know, like talking about talent and all of that, 80% of them stay in Finland, continue into university, continue into working life. So our plan now is to increase the number of students that we bring here next year to 500, then we'll scale it to 5,000 in 3 years, and by 2030 we will have 15,000 high school students starting high school in Finland every year, which is actually increasing the high school population by 50%. And after the 3 years of high school, you can apply for citizenship, because then you're like able to be a Finnish citizen. And we can do the same for Estonia and Estonian language. So again, changing the scenarios a little bit. So as you can see there, it's very easy to learn Finnish in half a year. Not a problem at all. And I've been told that it's you know, impossible, but you know, it's the same for Estonian. Finnish and Estonian are some of the easiest languages on the planet to learn. And I'll wrap up by saying that Vuotsai Beijing Beijur Da Shue Sila Baga Chinchi the Hanyu Dan Shue the Hanyu Haibuan Mei. So I learned Chinese in 8 weeks back in 2016. So it's also like possible to do that. And I did a presentation in Chinese in the 8th week to 200 Chinese people, and they even seemed to understand what I was saying. So yeah. So we can do this is my message. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, especially for the tidbits of how many months does it take to learn Finnish or Chinese, and also how many Estonians does it take to create a unicorn. By the virtue of being the moderator, I have the pleasure of asking the first round of questions, and then I will open it to our esteemed audience. Risto, I will torture you first. When you were showing your scenarios, they were showing the degrees of Celsius of increase in temperatures that you can expect with these scenarios. And most of them were below 3 degrees. So there were 2, 2.5, 1.5, and 3. So only 25% of your scenarios were the pessimistic one in the sense that we're not going to meet our Paris targets by far. However, in my work, I had the pleasure of reading about 120 international scenarios, and they're much more pessimistic about the world, basically saying that we're not going to meet with high degree of probability Paris targets, or maybe we will meet it, but we will meet them later, so in 2070 and 2080. So my question is, are you too optimistic about our future?
I don't know. I mean, nobody knows, but it really depends on who you are working with. And as we know, all the IPCC models are actually scenarios. They are models based on a lot of data, a lot of knowledge, but they are all based on assumptions about the future. And this group of 6 companies that we developed are very of course, technology-driven companies. And then they tend to have a more optimistic view of what can happen with technology and markets. So I think that this was a big discussion we had, but it reflects more the sort of 6 companies that we worked with. And since they were all in energy and technology sectors, yes, they were slightly more optimistic than what you find normally. I just go back to sort of scenario exercise we did 3-4 years ago, and back then we had some catastrophic scenarios included regarding climate. And the difference now was, I think, twofold. That the optimism concerning technology and what it can do was higher, and the second was that it was felt that both regulators, investors, consumers had already made the shift, and there was no going back. But yes, very optimistic indeed, but who knows?
And since it's a business school, I was wondering whether you could describe the process of what happens after the companies you have developed scenarios with these companies and for these companies. How is it being used in their decision making in the C-suite?
Well, there are different ways, but basically 2 main approaches. One is that you do notes for each scenario. That if we go into this direction, this is what's going to happen to ESB. And if we go to this direction, what are our strengths and weaknesses? What are our opportunities here? And then you create memories of the future. So that when you actually come to a situation that you recognize, oh wow, we are going to red alert, then you already have thought about what you need to do next. So that's number 1. And number 2 is actually that really isn't scenario work any longer, but it's based on scenario work. And that is that you can't keep 4 balls up in the air all the time. So then after having done this exercise, we come together and say, so, okay, what do we believe in? And that's a combination of these scenarios, and then you create a base scenario. And then you use that for budgeting and strategy and that sort of thing, with the sort of proviso that you actually are ready to jump into another development if needed. So those 2.
Wonderful. And you've mentioned some of the breakthrough technologies that the companies were mostly optimistic about. And in your longer presentation that you've shared with me, you've mentioned Industry 4.0 and artificial intelligence that also has been mentioned by Timo. Do you think these will be the technologies that will bring us the salvation or the doom, or maybe we're missing something completely obvious on the technology landscape that we haven't mentioned today?
Well, who knows? But I mean, this is the whole issue. If you go to Silicon Valley and talk to people there, most people there think that, hey, I mean, of course we will develop the technologies. I mean, we don't know exactly what they're going to be, but of course we will develop them. And then, well, I'll mention one, which of course makes everyone laugh, is fusion. And I mean, now everyone says that fusion technology is always 30 years away. But now, actually, there are sort of very good studies saying that 25 we will have sort of technology trials where pilots where you can stabilize the technology already, and 2050, 2040 we can be looking at that. So I am not an engineer, and that's why I'm a bit naive about these things. But I do believe that those sorts of technological breakthroughs will happen.
Peter, would you like to add some color to this?
Yeah, and I think that, like the guys in Silicon Valley will say that they will solve it, but actually they're wrong because we will do it. But the thing is that just, as an example, so okay, yeah, we're building a tunnel. Okay, one thing there, it's not like super interesting, it's like boring infrastructure. But one of the things that is happening that we get access to very interesting technologies because everybody wants to be part of this 15 billion euro project. So one thing that we're working on and most likely will actually be using, we're testing it now in this Pyhäjärvi mine, which is the deepest mine in Europe. Just like an interesting fact there, but we're plasma drilling. So that's been developed now in Bratislava in Slovakia for over 10 years. And what plasma drilling allows us to do is actually to do tunneling faster, but that's not even the most interesting thing. It allows us to drill over 10 kilometer deep holes cost efficiently. And when you get, we don't even need to go to 10 kilometers, then it's hot enough, not only to produce like the heat, the warming, but to produce electricity. And we only need to do, I think it was like 3,000 of these, and then, we save the planet. And that's like totally clean energy, and it doesn't depend on the sun shining or the wind, blowing or anything like that. So that is kind of like a tiny little side thing that comes out of this tunnel project. So, building a tunnel and saving the planet, why not? So I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to address this, and the technologies are already there, even without the fusion thing. So I think that, again, we'll get there, but I think we will also need to do a lot of work to kind of make that happen, and I think that I have full confidence in kind of the young people making that happen. And if you look at the attitudes of the young people, it's also very clear that we're seeing a big change. So I think that it's again a bit of technology and a bit of attitude, and we're there.
Timo, I think that question could also be directed to you.
Let me sort of be the realist, and I'm partially sort of maybe the pessimist. So I approach sort of a technology change from the perspective of that how long the assets are that we are actually using for infrastructure for at our households, and that is how long those assets are, then that is basically that will be the lead time for these new technology implementations. So, for example, if this house has a life cycle of 50 to 60 years, well, we can do incremental things, but again, it will take a lot of the time. So I think that it is important to understand that the work that Peter is working on is a good example of a project where you can use new technologies. But imagine the old tunnels that what we have. and updating those into sort of a energy efficient way of operations. That is the problem that what we have. There is this example that I provided to the city of Helsinki when they asked me the question that when can we start using autonomous vehicles in our streets? I said to them that you can start using autonomous vehicles immediately if you want, but then you need to remove people, those scooters, bicycles, and rest of the assets that operate in that environment to somewhere else. So what could be the solution, they ask? Move them into 10-meter, build a new infrastructure on a 10-meter height and move them there. There you have the infrastructure for the autonomous vehicles immediately if you want, but then you need to remove the other ones, because if stupid people are there, then the stupidity will continue. And so I think that there is a way to move faster if you make radical changes to the infrastructure. And the same thing is with the companies. They have their products on the market for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So they need to make radical moves if they want to implement new technologies. And again, it comes to their customers. Customers are really the drivers for all these changes. So if we, as customers, don't want to buy, then it will never ever happen.
I agree about your comment with respect to the sticky infrastructure and the path dependencies there. We've recently heard some insights, and we as in summer school, from our previous speakers that mentioned only 1% of building stock is built anew every year. And not every new building will be a green building. So it's really important to plan. And for example, in Helsinki and in Tallinn, we have buildings that are hundreds of years old, and they're protected, and you can't just slap a solar panel on the rooftop, even if you wanted to. So it's definitely a problem. I will move next to Peter. You provided a very compelling vision of Helsinki, or finest bay. But let's just catch up with you, because there might be a next project that you're already working on. Can you please provide us with the vision of the next big thing for the region that you're considering?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think that the most important thing for us right now is to make sure that we can keep up this very good development that we already have. And I mean, if you look at, if I take the games industry, in Finland we have about 4,000 people working in games, and the next 12 months probably adding 1,500 people or something like that. That's what it's looking like. And everywhere I go, now during the pandemic, been kind of like all over the place in Finland. Also actually visited more places in Estonia than ever before. And I think that everywhere it's the same challenge, that biggest problem is that there's not people to do the jobs, and it's like for everything. So I think that right now it's all about creating the gravity and making sure that we can attract the talent. And we need, like in the technology industries in Finland alone, we need like 50,000 new people in the next few years. I mentioned like the games industry, 1,500 people needs to be added, and that's like pretty massive growth, and that's just games. So I think that what we need to do is really make sure that we attract these people, and you saw the young people like there in the video. So that takes a bit of time, because again, they go through high school, they go through university, and like all of that. So it's not like, okay, we decide today and then it's like instantly there, and we're already kind of like late. But this high school thing, I'm pretty excited about, because we can still kind of like have an impact that is fairly like fast. It's not like that we have to kind of like give birth, raise the kids, and then like 20 years and they come out, or 20 plus years. So now we can kind of like a bit of a shortcut, and it's a win-win, because we have like Vietnam and Uzbekistan, many countries where their population pyramid is like a pyramid and not like the upside one that we have here in Finland and Estonia. So I think that we can create a win-win situation there. I mean, just taking Uzbekistan, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there were 90 million people, now there are 34. And they can't educate the whole population, so basically they need help. And who has the best educational system on the planet? We do, so it's a win-win. And I think that that's again something that we can do. And so for me, it's not like one project, but I think that we need to invest in scaling up like our educational system. And as I said, like I think EBS is a great example that you are here in Helsinki and in Tallinn, and we need to have more of that. And maybe one thing that I think it's more like here that, and why it's good to talk about like the finest Bay Area, that it's very important that we do more things together, Finland and Estonia. We're both EU countries, we're in the Eurozone, Schengen, you name it. Okay, not NATO, both of us yet, but that's another discussion. But I think that it doesn't make any sense that we have very different processes to do the same things if we're like part of the same market and all of that. So it's been really interesting when building the tunnel how little communication we have between our two governments and like the different authorities. I mean, it's minimal, and when it happens, we don't even understand each other. And it's not because of language, it's just that we're being so polite and diplomatic, so we don't get stuff done. But yeah, so I think that we need to invest more into education and then attracting the talent. So we need to make sure that one thing that happens when a Finn or a Estonian, when we meet a foreign person, in Finland or Estonia, what is the first thing that happens? No, yeah, maybe in Estonia, I don't know. But actually, if we actually talk to that person, and then, I'm here from the US, then the first question is always, why are you here? Why are you here? If you go to Silicon Valley and then say, I'm Peter from Finland, they're not going to ask me why I'm there. It's kind of like a given that, of course you're here in Silicon Valley because everybody is here. But we need to get to the same thing that, we don't ask them why they're here, but it's like, what are you doing here? And like, are you bringing your friends and your family and everything? So these are kind of like, I think that's like a big thing and big change that we need to do. But yeah, anyway.
Risto also had a comment on this.
Absolutely agree with everything Peter said. One of the scenarios I presented was this regulation-driven world. And my fear is at the moment that this COVID paradigm will stay. And I'll give you an example that relates to what you were saying. I just talked to a CEO of a company yesterday, and they have trained 200 nurses in the Philippines. They are nurses, and they've been studying Finnish for 1 year, and they'll be as good as the people that you showed there. They are not able to come to Finland. Why? Because the law says that in order to be able to travel here, you have to have a personal interview. And they can't possibly organize a personal interview now because the consulate is closed. And they can't possibly think of a way to get around it. And so this has been going on for months. There are no nurses available here. So this, I think that what you are saying is so right. And I have a fear that this regulatory state that has come back during the COVID is going to make it very difficult to do these things. Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, just in that part, I mean, this is a big problem in both Finland and Estonia. But actually, there, if you look at the Estonian side, Estonia has some of these processes worked out much better than we do here in Finland. Startup visa. Many governments here in Finland, we fought to get that. And then we finally got it, and then they rebranded startup permit because, hey, let's not get your hope up here that you can do something without permission in Finland. So this is like regulatory state. So in Finland, we ended up with startup permit. In Estonia, startup visa. First 3 years of startup visa in Estonia, and the process there is that you have like Startup Estonia, so part of Enterprise Estonia, so the government, and then you have the startups looking at, okay, good startup, welcome to our country. In Finland, we created a very heavy like Business Finland-led process, and result is that in the first 3 years, Estonia has attracted 500 international startup founders to Estonia, and with them, 1,500 people have moved to Estonia from all over the planet. In Finland, first year, we issued 30 of these startup permits, and then you ask Nina Kopola, who runs Business Finland, that how many of them actually got to the country. No idea, because after that it goes to Migri, the Finnish immigration authority, and nobody knows if they get to the country or not. I know that one Russian person that I was coaching, actually a startup sauna, got to Finland because he gave an interview to Finnish media saying that fantastic that he could come from Russia and start his company here in Finland. Even better would have been if his team could have joined him. So they are now back in Russia. So then end result, second year of Finnish startup permit, 57 permits issued. And you know, so we're like so much worse than Estonia. So why don't we work together and, you know, make this happen so that both Finland and Estonia would be, you know, like better than anybody else on the planet. And then one more example, you saw the Vietnamese young people there. We also have a group of young Uzbek people who have learned even better Finnish because we managed to send a teacher and have her there on the ground. They had to fly 4.5 hours from Tashkent in Uzbekistan to Moscow to the Finnish embassy to basically just be identified, and 4.5 hours back. So super bad for the environment, obviously. Why do we want to fly people back and forth when we can solve it with technology? And the flight ticket is equal to 8.5 months' salary in Uzbekistan. So, you know, like not making it easy to come to this country at all. So this is one thing that we have to fix, because it's not like everybody wants to come to Finland or Estonia, even though, you know, we have the finest Bay Area and all of that. I mean, there are some other places where, you know, people think that they need to go. But yeah, so we have to fix this, but we are fighting it every day.
Great. So we have about half an hour left for questions. We will be passing around a microphone. Scott will assist us with that. Thank you, Scott. He's one of the co-directors of the summer school, by the way. And when you start speaking, please identify yourself. And if it's a question directed to a certain speaker, please mention that.
Hey, my name is Aida Dents. I'm from Enterprise Estonia. In the beginning of 2000, it was very easy to be a leader and say that I'm making my business green by taking out paper. So basically paperless was green. And I'm worried that many business leaders today, they don't even understand what it means to make their business green. Does it mean that making digital, making that is like a green or what? So are we able to explain our business leader what it means and how to do it and what we need for that?
Are you directing this question to the whole panel? Yeah, let's go to Risto.
What it means green. I'll start. There are different versions of this. What's happening is really now is that first it was the regulators, and now it's the finance industry that's doing it. And part of this is sort of identifying things as whether they're green or not. This is part of the EU taxonomy, where everything is being sort of characterized either green or not green and that sort of thing. And finally, what we have now is that all the major sort of banks and hedge funds, all those who control investments are looking at green criteria. And they are asking the same question as you are. So we are still very much in the process. I was talking to the biggest European bank, BNP Paribas, and I asked them that how do you then evaluate whether this company should get money for a project, whether it's green or not? And because somebody may be in fossil fuels, but making a green jump, is that good, or is it better if you start on a high level? And the final answer was, it depends on their story. It depends on their story. So if you can make a good argument that what you're doing is green, then you will get money, and then afterwards we will see whether it was green or not. I'm afraid that's where we are.
It reminds me of the story that some consumers keep telling themselves that if they get the straw that is not made of plastic, but that's made of a sustainable straw material, that it will save the environment while we continue using other very unsustainable practices. Thank you, Risto. Timo, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that we have a lot of measures in our societies that are quite subjective, and that is a huge problem. Those subjective measures that we are using for measuring society have been increasing and increasing during the last 10 years, 20 years maybe. And I think that's a wrong way of going forward. If we introduce subjective measures, what is green, what is good customer service, what is good quality, those cannot be measured. I always say to my students that what is the value of good quality or green? No, there is no value. There is no economic value. The only thing that if you can measure sort of the green's economic value, then it really starts sort of thriving managers and the management of the companies. But until it is a subjective measure, nobody really cares. So it is just green, and I think that this is again that when I was sort of giving my short sort of a presentation, I said that we when we sort of did that study, we wanted to bring the numbers to the table, 1.8%. That is the first number, and now you can start talking about what is energy efficient in the ICT sector. But until green is just a definition of a green, it really doesn't matter. There needs to be numbers included that how you measure green. And in fact, that we did a master thesis work with one of my students interviewing these investors. None of them gave us measures. Subjective things. It really doesn't matter. Are these subjective things driving change? No. And that's how I think that this green is going to be as green as this button over here. It is just a matter of opinion. How green it is. It's quite green.
I'm telling my students that the solution is to price the externality, then we at least know what is not green. Yeah. Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, but I think that I mean there are solutions to this, and I mean if you look at like fashion industry, that's kind of like a big we can have a big impact there. But then if you talk to the companies, so your question exactly that do we know? And most of the companies want to do the right thing, but they don't know how. So for example, we have one startup here in Finland, Ivalo. So they have actually worked together with Aalto University on this kind of like sustainability framework for the fashion industry. And they're helping brands to kind of like then implement that so that the brands can actually say that, yes, we have, you know, like looked at the whole like supply chain and how we produce stuff, and it's actually we can show you that it's sustainable. And I think that this is the kind of stuff that we need to get to, that we can show that we have the perfect story, but we're also actually executing on that perfect story. And I think that, again, I think that, you know, startups and entrepreneurs will solve this. And it's, again, that we just need to kind of like then work together, like in this Ivalo example, with the university, with the academic side, so that we can actually back it up with like real research. And then just like go out there and do it.
Thank you, Peter. More questions from the audience.
One additional comment to this green. I think green is partially it's about overregulation, and I'm afraid that like what had happened now with all the digital technologies, we are already overregulating digital technologies within EU Commission or in EU. And the same thing will happen to green. We will overregulate green. And what that means, if we overregulate green over here in Europe, that's not good for the European companies. But we are lucky that this overregulation is happening all over the world at this moment of time. For example, the Chinese government has just started to overregulate the Chinese tech companies. The US, they are having exactly the same discussion. So, because this overregulation, what it means additional cost. And if you cannot price those costs to your customers, then, and like I was voting for the money talks, because I do believe that money talks, but overregulation is cost. And I'm afraid that we are moving into that direction when it comes to Europe, and Europe is going to be in deep shit with that one.
Thank you for this comment. Next question, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Taneli Lahti. I work for the European Commission. I welcome very much the advice on overregulation. And I just like one comment. Most of the regulation actually is initiated by companies, by industries. Regulatory developments are driven by the users of regulation. So it is not that we are somehow sitting in a dark room trying to think how to make lives as difficult as possible for companies. It's rather the other way around. Now, I'd like to congratulate, of course, the Estonian Business School here in Helsinki. I'd like to thank very much for the opportunity to be here and be inspired. It's my first day after summer break, and I couldn't think of a better way to get back to work. I'd like to congratulate also the speakers for some excellent ideas and comments made. The finest Bay Area, I think, is a brilliant description for this region here and for what's happening here. Now, my comment, I have one comment and one question. And the comment is that we have actually here in this area, we have benefited for the last 30 years of a tremendously beneficial global development and global environment that has created lots of opportunities and possibilities for agile, dynamic, fast, relatively small societies like ours to succeed. And we've done so. Now I think we've already seen a shift to another direction, and it will accelerate over the next few years. It has already accelerated during the pandemic, but we will see a more fragmented global environment. We will see futures, not a future, as said by Dr. Penttilä. We will be seeing a Chinese green and digital transition. We will be seeing an American-driven green and digital transition, and a European green and digital transition. And this will be, and obviously, as described in the 4 scenarios, and all of these scenarios are possible, and all of them may appear simultaneously, but somehow something that I'm missing a bit here in the finest Bay Area in the thinking is that we always tend to look at the world as something that happens, and we need to adjust. We need to find the opportunities and adjust. And I'm wondering whether some of the sort of entrepreneurial spirit that Peter, I think, very well sort of represents, could be also reflected in sort of the regulatory and policy work, and whether we could also perhaps shape the global environment, not just take it. Because I do believe that for example, and on the taxonomy discussion, on defining what is green, and the perspective from the finest Bay Area usually is to say that, well, we don't like this. We say no to this. You're doing a mistake here. You're doing a mistake there. Why don't we drive it? Why don't we set the example? Why are we not using these benefits that we have here to actually be at the forefront? We have great. The commissioner in charge for energy transition at the moment is an Estonian lady, Kadri Simson. And she's not the only one to talk to, but at least there's a door there that opens quite quickly. So I think there's an opportunity there as well, and to be shaping the environment rather than just taking it. Thank you. And yeah, the question would be simply to ask, and how do you see, and how could we get there to shape the environment, not just take it?
Since Peter has been called out, maybe you could start, and then we'll move this way.
Yeah, I think that we are already doing it and at least trying to do it. So basically, during the spring, another commissioner, so Maria Gabriel, who is in charge of innovation, education, and youth, which I think is one of the most important roles in the commission. So we actually been talking about the startup ecosystem, and I think that Maria and her team very much think that the Finnish Bay Area should be the role model for all of Europe. And we had several presentations we actually had these state secretaries of Portugal, France, and Slovenia. I think it was in Portugal now with handing over the chairmanship of the EU or that, and was very interesting because I was asked to give an intro there, and then when we prepared for that, I used Estonia as an example, and that we should all be. I always have this advice that be Estonia, because I think that it's a very good example, not only with the unicorns. But then, it was interesting when we prepared for, this presentation then to all of these important people. Then I said that, okay, I used the 7 unicorns per capita, or the highest number of unicorns per capita in Estonia. And then, okay, I don't remember now the math, but it's would mean that in Germany you would have quite a few unicorns. And then I was told, but Peter, that would mean that we would be better than the US. And it's of course, why wouldn't we be better than the US? I mean, what kind of stupid argument is that? But I think that you're absolutely right that EU, we're kind of accepting our fate that of course we will never be able to compete with China and the US, and they're just far ahead. And then this kind of thing that hey, that's Estonia, we can't be as good as Estonia here in Germany or France or whatever. Of course they can. And I mean, that's we need to challenge them, and we need to take this initiative, and we need to be, it's good here in both Finland and Estonia that we're very good at being very, very modest. That, sorry that we exist, and, blah, 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 and, so I think that we need to kind of change that a little bit and actually be, a bit more vocal about what we have achieved. Because when I say that we're the clear leader, we are. I mean, if you look at the number of unicorns, look at the startup investments, look at any metric like that, you take Estonia, you take Finland, you take Sweden. That's pretty much all the action in Europe. And then we need to kind of build on that and say that, hey, we know that we can make this work, and let's work together and make all of the EU. It doesn't have to be as good as Estonia, but as good as Finland would be a good start. So yeah.
Make the EU awesome again. Timo, your thoughts.
Well, I'm not always complaining about the legislation. Sometimes I love legislation, and there is, by the way, there is a very good article by Amurad Chandler from UC Davis. He wrote a piece some time ago that law made Silicon Valley. Sorry to use the word Silicon Valley, but basically the main sort of a point on that article was that because US was lowering the legislation standard for privacy regulation, that basically gave the opportunity for Silicon Valley to build these social media and the current ICT companies. And why I'm saying that we are over-regulating at this moment of time, because we are really tightening the regulation. We are not trying to foster sort of the growth from so we are not. I think that the legislation should be seen as a tool for opening opportunities for entrepreneurs, and we are not using that as a tool like that. And I think that that's basically the biggest mistake that the Commission is making. They are not opening opportunities for entrepreneurs by changing the law. They are tightening the regulation and making the entrepreneurship more difficult. So I think that is just a change in mind that what we need to see in a Commission, so that we can really sort of start fighting on this. Europe could be basically a third leg into this Sino-American technology separation, because currently that when we see where the digital technologies are heading, Europe is not part of that competition, what will happen within the next 10 to 20 years, because these technologies are being developed in China or in the US. But now we need to sort of, how do we open the opportunities for European entrepreneurs so that they can become as part of this technology separation and the new competitive landscape for these sort of technologies. I think that, but yeah, law can be used for many different ways, but at this moment of time, I think it's used in a wrong way.
As an anecdotal evidence, it's important what is the default setting.
Exactly.
In Germany, the default setting is it's forbidden unless the law explicitly allows for that. In the US, it's the other way around. It's
Exactly.
allowed unless the law forbids it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Timo. Risto, your thoughts on this?
What a wonderful question and a good comment. And let me put it this way. Entrepreneurs are really important. But in addition, we need smart civil servants. And I think this is something that Singapore and Finland, probably Estonia, have in common. Singapore pays civil servants as much as CEOs of leading companies to attract the best and the brightest. We've relied on the fact that the status of being a civil servant is very respected, and that's fine. But I think that we should go a bit more to the Singapore style in Europe and in Finland, and basically say that we want star performers as civil servants. And then they would be able to also differentiate between a big corporation who says that we would like to have this regulation, and then rather than just go with it, to say, is this good for the ecosystem? So my answer is that we need smart entrepreneurs, but we need smart civil servants. And I would rather take less of smarter people than more not smart. So but I think that this is actually where we should be very good, because we have the basis both in Estonia and Finland for that.
I have to kind of like, I agree with like the need for smart civil servants, but I think that we're very, very far from that in Finland. And I mean, I have had so many interactions with our civil servants now with, like tunnel project, education, all of that also in Estonia. And I think that we have a situation where, yes, we have some kind of like smart civil servants, but we also have built a bureaucracy that is all about fighting entrepreneurship, fighting private initiative. And this is something that in Finland we need to kind of like basically have a big reform of our like bureaucracy. I mean, we have built our bureaucracy back in the time when we were under, like this, or let's say when Russia was still part of Finland, and we had a Tsar and everything. And basically we had to build this system where we had created all of these silos where, like they were created so that the Tsar couldn't decide and make any big change. Okay, the Tsar is like gone, but we still have this like approach to our, like bureaucracy. And this is why Finland is suffering, why we have become very slow. And when we look at the, that we're there with sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to the growth, that is because of our whole like bureaucracy is built for, let's say, times that are no longer with us. We are not able to change as fast as the world around us. And I'm starting to see signs of that in Estonia as well. And because it's modeled in many cases, just took what works in Finland and then, run with that, and it's worked pretty well. But I think that both of us are suffering from this problem. And Singapore, yes, but we also have to remember that Singapore is like a fascist state, and let's not even go there. But I think that I agree that we need to have much smarter civil servants, and in Finland it's not about the individuals, it's about the system, and we need to change it. And that's next government needs to do that reform. Otherwise, we're not going to do very well.
I would agree with Peter that institutional setup sometimes suppresses entrepreneurship within the people. I've seen that working for the Department of Energy in the US. Closing question by Melis Kitsing, please.
Actually, I don't have a question. I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things that Taneli said and what you also discussed here. Before I was elected rector, I actually worked at the Foresight Center, and the last thing we did was global scenarios and what they mean for Estonia. And Risto also contributed, and Anna was a key contributor as well. And actually, in those scenarios, we played around with two key drivers. One was the nature of EU cooperation, another one was the infrastructure development. And by infrastructure, it means just tunnels, but we also mean human, social infrastructure, and so on. And combining, let's say, really positive, strong EU cooperation and really advanced investments in infrastructure, we came up with a scenario which is called a Compass Europe. So this is sort of Brussels effect, or Brussels has a positive effect. And I think this is what Taneli basically sort of said, that this, this type of scenario. And by the way, we also involved Kadri Simson in the process and other decision makers. So at least is aware that there is that type of scenario. But this is another question whether we will get there, and it's a little bit similar to regulation scenario, because strong EU cooperation, regulation may also have lots of unintended consequences, and then you get to this sort of like global political economy. You gave example of carbon tax. Obviously, even if Estonia and Finland would impose a carbon tax, it wouldn't help anybody. If Europe would impose a carbon tax, it might just lead to the more trade wars and so on. And you may actually end up in a scenario which we called anchored Europe, where you still have a strong EU cooperation, but in the wrong areas. And instead of Brussels effect, you have a Brussels defect. But in any case, we were also quite optimistic, but because I think in three scenarios out of four, this area was doing pretty well. In any case, even if there is not strong EU cooperation, we'll still find ways how to advance infrastructure with private money or maybe more US involvement and so on. We were also quite optimistic about this area. So this is a positive thing. So thanks. So this was just sort of brief reflection on this debate.
Thank you, Melis, for this reflection. I would like to recognize the student in our summer school and let the last question be from her.
There will be 3 questions, actually. Sorry in advance. Agata Orton, Koźmiński University, Poland. First things first to Peter, because you were actually telling a lot to us about education. So what would be your 3 reasons to give for university authorities that they should run more sustainable, more green curricula, for instance? The second one is for the professor. Professor, are you actually detecting like the greenwashing practices among companies at Aalto, and you're actually, just publicly saying it out loud, or you are just, hiding them and promoting the ones who are doing actually great? Because actually at Koźmiński we have some, sorry for the name, but we have the bullshit detector at Green Koźmiński at our student organization. So we are actually not promoting, we are just saying out loud that this kind of companies are doing really, really bad for the environment, for the, society as well. And for the whole panel, I would say, because I'm working for PepsiCo as well. So, it's a big plastic polluter. They are really ranked at the 3rd place, according to global reports. And actually, it was one of my even justifications for the global challenge that I have been participating in, that either they are polluting the world, of course, but we can actually trying to convince them that they should, take over only glass bottles or something, but either way, they will lose clients, right? So what would be your, advices, tips for them to actually show that they are investing in this kind of sustainability agenda? Because I really know what PepsiCo is doing within sustainability, but people are actually not aware of that. Thank you.
So our challenge here is address that in the remaining time.
Timo, please. Basically, I used to work in the electronics industry for some 10 years before I actually joined academia, and basically company has started to implement their sustainability initiatives already sort of early when was it, in the end of 1990s. So companies have been already on this path for almost 30 years. And we know the fact that how much sort of a technology has been advancing. So whenever there's a possibility, companies are taking new technologies into use. The problem at this moment of time is that companies are not designing their products from sustainability perspective. They are not designing their products from recycling perspective. Because, for example, when it comes to mobile phones, it's impossible to recycle mobile phones, especially, for example, the raw material used. Because the material technologies that we are using in those mobile phones are nano-layered sort of a type of things. So it's when we are combining different materials into, for example, different components, those components are made so small that it's impossible to separate the materials later on in the process, because there is no design for sustainability. So I think that our technologies has advanced so much, for example, in the material technology area, that we cannot recycle those materials, because those materials that we are using are a combination of thousands of different components embedded into one single piece of component. And that is a problem. So our technology is so advanced, it is impossible to recycle. Then the other thing is that we have been we are now making a study for Prime Minister's office related to the impact of COVID and impact on environmental standards, and we have been interviewing quite a lot of companies during the last 3-4 months, and basically what we hear companies saying is that these initiatives that we are taking right now are really not changing the thinking within the corporations that much, because companies have been working with these topics already for 20 to 30 years, implementing different type of standards for sustainability, for this and that. So, but I think that the big thing to come is really to when the companies will start designing a product from sustainability and recycling perspective. But it will take time, because these making new products, making sort of products based on these new materials that are more sustainable, it will take another 3 to 5 years to implement those into their product portfolios. Then there is the business case always within the companies. Is it worthwhile implementing? Are customers really willing to pay? One way of making that, of course, is using legislation, saying that, okay, you got to do this. Then there will be more radical changes to the corporations. But without sort of it is just going to happen, but it will take a lot of a period of time. So yeah, so I think that we need to be quite realistic on that how long time it will take to us to become green. And in fact, I think that those, well, the contracts that, or the agreements that we have made in Paris are basically, well, maybe too early, but who knows?
Thank you, Timo. Risto.
Yeah, what should PepsiCo do? Well, tell them to call us, we'll help with them. No, actually, well, it's partly true, because what we've realized is that for any company who wants to take these issues seriously, you really have to look at the entire supply chain. And companies are already doing that, but there's still more and more you can do. And so that would be my advice, just to concentrate on that.
My advice to PepsiCo would be that now they are basically selling their responsibility of recycling to consumers. They should own the bottles, and they should own the raw materials used to those bottles. Then they will start thinking about this, that. So we need well, the problem that what we have in these current supply chains is that we are passing the responsibility by selling things to one another. And we need to change that way of making money, selling things. If you license the bottle, then there might be an opportunity, you need to take it back. But if you go from selling to licensing model in these supply chains, there is going to be happening a lot of the balance sheets of the companies that how they are currently structured is that somebody takes the responsibility of the assets. So that will change if you go from selling to licensing. But of course, that in software business, we have been licensing software for how long? 40 years. But really, it's changing the understand that, or they're asking the question that should we own something? I think that is a key, and I think that if we would make a legislation for Pepsi and Coca-Cola and all those companies that they should own the bottles. And they should be responsible for owning the bottles for the life cycle of those bottles. Then they will start considering that how in hell we would recycle and so I think it's a kind of a change in the paradigm that we need for the ownership or for selling and the ownership of things before we can actually go green.
Timo, we're standing between the people and their lunch.
Yeah, I know.
So I would like to ask, Timo, Peter for closing remarks.
Yeah, just answer your question about why the universities should care about offering this to the students and young people, and I think that it's because that's what the young people want, and as we heard from Timo, that's also what the companies will need to go through this transformation, that they actually need people who know what they're doing. So again, I think like the short answer is education, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Let's give a big hand to our speakers.